Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, Red Red Dawn, Stay Close to Me. This is Red Dawn, the 2012 version. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like Red Dawn, the 2012 version, which we'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty good. I gotta say, chugging along. I'm still walking, closing my Apple Fitness rings. Not as good as gummy rings, but they're better for me. We had some snow in the local mountains this last week. We even had some graupel. Graupel, is that how you say it? Have you ever heard this word?
That's a made-up word.
It is all over Southern California in the last week. Graupel is apparently kind of like hail. If hail was Dippin' Dots, that's graupel. Tiny snowballs. We've apparently got some by me, but I didn't see it. I just heard about it after.
Oh, well, that's no fun. Did those like damaging cars and stuff?
No, because it's soft. It doesn't break your car.
Isn't that just snow? Tiny snowballs that are soft?
It's tiny snowballs because it's not flakes. It's grouped into little balls. They're not
What
hard
causes
like
that?
I don't know. Southern
That's
California,
weird.
apparently.
Yeah.
It's like a new word. It's all over local TV.
I'm not a fan of this term. I think they should come up with a better term for it.
I'm not sure I like it either.
It sounds like something you would eat for breakfast in the Midwest. You know, like,
It's got oats and pickled fish, and it's this acquired taste.
but that's good, though. You're getting your walks in. That's exciting.
Yes.
I'm not getting so many walks in, but that's okay. We've been getting snow now.
Oh, okay.
You know, they waited till it was almost springtime. We got 5 inches of snow earlier this week. We're supposed to get another 5 inches of snow tomorrow.
Wow.
Which is not like a lot for this area, but we made it all the way to March with zero snow all winter. And now it's hitting us twice in 1 week now that we're supposed to be done with all this shit. I know March isn't like a real cutoff, but for me, it always felt like it's March now. There shouldn't be any more snow.
You could start to be hopeful. When does spring actually happen? Late March?
The 20s, somewhere in
Yeah.
March 21st, 22nd, something like that, I thought.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But get it out of your system now and then give us a nice spring, please. I'm ready for this to be over. But what did you happen to watch this week, Ian, that you wanted to share with the listeners?
I watched something tasty. It's called The Lobster. 2016 movie by Yorgos Lanthimos, who I knew only from The Favorite, which was a really good movie from a couple years ago. Got a bunch of Oscar noms. It stars Colin Farrell, Rachel Weisz, Olivia Colman, Léa Seydoux, John C. Reilly. Killer cast, top to bottom. It's highly absurd, surreal, dark comedy. Certainly a comedy because it's so absurd, but it's kind of gloomy and awful for a lot of it. It deals with finding romantic love and also handling society's expectations around finding romantic love. But it doesn't do that in a straightforward way. It does it in these metaphors of a sci-fi story set in a hotel, but you turn into an animal if you don't find a mate in time. It's kooky.
But you get to pick the animal.
You get to pick the animal.
That's something.
And Colin Farrell picks a lobster, and so thus the title of the movie. I really loved it. It's the kind of movie that could really put you off, and everybody is not going to like this movie, but somehow it tickled me. I laughed a lot. I felt a lot of feelings, but not like straightforward feelings, complicated feelings about love and society and life in general. So I want to recommend it, but I know everybody won't like it.
That's fair. I think Yorgos is a polarizing figure in film because I was a big fan of his kind of American breakout movie, which was A Killing of a Sacred Deer, which was another Colin Farrell starring vehicle with our weird little guy, Barry Keoghan.
Barry Keoghan, yes.
Yeah, like his movies definitely do not follow a typical Hollywood structure or tone. Even just like the way the plot is delivered always feels a little out there, a little different, but you've piqued my interest. I've avoided The Lobster for a long time because it sounded so twee that I couldn't quite buy in, but I might have to give it a chance now.
Yeah, it's like a Wes Anderson movie made by a darker, grimmer Greek guy.
Has he worked with Joel Edgerton yet? I feel like they need to work together.
They would have some fun together.
Seems like they would. This is the second week in a row that you're bringing like a pretty high-minded, thoughtful piece of, and I'm using a jerk-off motion while I say this, cinema.
Yeah, I've been in a mood.
I'm just going to come in and shit all over it with a Cocaine Bear.
Uh-oh.
I made it to the movie theaters.
How was it?
Cocaine Bear was fun. I wholeheartedly recommend it for anybody just looking to shut their brain off for an hour and a half and watch a bear do a ton of cocaine and just go on a killing spree. Our boy Alden Ehrenreich from Solo is pretty much the main character, I guess you'd say. Like him and Kerry Russell are co-leads. There's a few different threads going on. Margot Martindale, character actress extraordinaire, has a sizable role. Love her. Just a really fun cast. Some spotty CGI because I don't think their budget was that big, and nobody films with real animals anymore. So anytime the bear's on screen, it's going to be a fully CGI creature, which is understandable for the difficulties of filming with a bear. I certainly wouldn't expect them to use a live one for these scenes.
Better not to, for all kinds of reasons.
But it reminded me of another movie I've talked about on the pod semi-recently, which was Violent Night, taking a familiar story and just inserting one over-the-top ridiculous element into it and seeing how that changes the equation. And it just makes it that much more fun. It's really a tale of like gangsters trying to recover their lost drugs and innocent people getting caught in the crosshairs. But then you throw a bear on cocaine that is in a murderous rampage into the mix, and it heightens everything. The stakes feel a little lower to be certain, but it just makes everything a little more fun.
It sounds fun when you describe it. I think I lost the feeling for the joy that it might contain in the run-up to it. There was so much hype for it. And I'm like, this is no way I'm going to enjoy this. And I even forgot that there would be a story in it. And I'm like, there's no story. It's just a bunch of actors running from a bear for no particular reason. But obviously there's a little story and there's some actors that we like. And I'm glad to hear that it was charming and not just exploitative. So that's a positive.
No, it's got one of the final Ray Liotta performances we're ever going to get. So
oh, wow.
Worth checking it out just for that.
Oh, and poignancy out of Cocaine Bear. Who would have thought?
Right. There's definitely some Henry Hill overlap at play there in casting Ray Liotta. But also, I just have to say that the older O'Shea Jackson Jr. gets, it's like getting creepy how much he looks and also sounds like his dad.
Wow, yeah.
Because he's also like, not to be cruel, but he's gained a few pounds from like when we saw him in the Skull Island movie where he was playing a Marine. So he was very trim, but now he's more of an everyman physique and he just looks exactly like his dad looked in like 1993. It's kind of creepy. It is fun. Red Dawn, Ian, we're talking the 2012 Red Dawn, not the 1984 Red Dawn. But what if you have some memories of the 1984 Red Dawn, I'd love to hear them, but just tell me what you know about this movie. How familiar were you with it until we started getting ready for this?
I remember this one coming out and just being pretty much uninterested in it. I'm like, I don't really need a Red Dawn remake. And this is before I knew Chris Hemsworth, and we'll talk about his career arc and how it had one of its starting points around this movie. So I was like, not doing anything for me. Now, the original made a huge impression on me back in my early teen years. Like it hit at this time where it was just a hugely influential movie, just big piece of pop culture. We called the movie Casabin Passabit. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody listening to this, but anyone who's old enough to remember the original Red Dawn posters, it said Red Dawn in Russian above where it said Red Dawn in English on all the posters. And if you have no idea about Russian and you read the Cyrillic letters as if they were Latin characters, it kind of looks like Casabin Passabit, or that's like the closest me and my buddies could come to pronouncing what it said on the poster. So that was just a stupid thing we'd say to each other when anyone brought up the movie Red Dawn. We'd say Casabin Passabit.
This is an Ian tidbit, by the way. This qualifies.
But on the serious side, like the threat of war with Soviet Russia at that time was really real. And anybody who grew up in that time, it was traumatic. It was like a low-level fear of annihilation. As soon as you got old enough to figure things out and they started putting movies like this out, they started putting things like The Day After on TV, which was like, here's a family TV special. So you can picture what it looks like if America is blown up by nuclear bombs. So we all lived with that shit and it was kind of harsh. And so this one, I think, touched a nerve with young people at that time. And that's why the battle cry of Wolverines really resonated with a generation of people. Like it was meaningful to, have that image of some kind of successful resistance against the fear that we all lived under.
It's interesting to hear about like the cultural impact of the original Red Dawn because it wasn't like a massive hit when it first came out. It did okay. It doubled its budget, but just barely. Even the original Red Dawn feels like a movie that found its audience a little later. It had a $17 million budget. It made $38 million at the box office. So it's not a runaway hit by any means. I wasn't even born when the original Red Dawn came out, but I heard a ton about it growing up as just like the apex of 80s action movies. And this is a movie you need to check out. And I did. Like I had older brothers who were big fans and they had it on VHS and we watched it. But it wasn't a movie that was really appreciated in its time. And then I picked this movie because of all the hubbub around Chinese spy balloons, because I was certain that this movie dealt with a Chinese invasion of America. And then I watched the movie, come to find out that no, it's North America, but
North Korea, you mean?
Right. Yes. Sorry. But then talk to you about it, come to find out that it's even weirder than all that.
Yeah, you were right. This movie is about China. And then in the end, it's not. A lot to talk about there. We will open up that can as we go.
I guess I could open it up right now if you like.
You want to tell us how this thing happened?
Sure. In 1984, Hollywood's foremost conservative besides Clint Eastwood, John Milius, directed the Russian/Cuban invasion thriller Red Dawn, which got mixed reviews but was a minor commercial hit and eventually became a cult classic. In May 2008, Harry Sloan and Mary Parent from MGM announced that a remake of Red Dawn was in pre-production and that it would, quote, keep in mind the post-9/11 world we're in. Stunt coordinator and second unit director extraordinaire Dan Bradley was confirmed to be making his directorial debut with the movie, and Carl Ellsworth, who had written movies like Red Eye and Disturbia, was brought in to rewrite a script that had originally been written by Jeremy Passmore.
The only thing missing was to cast an Australian hunk.
Australian hunk Chris Hemsworth was cast in the lead role of Jed Eckert, while Josh Peck, Josh Hutcherson, Adrianne Palicki, Isabel Lucas, and Brett Cullen were brought in to round out the cast. With a $50 million budget, production began in September 2009 in Mount Clemens, Michigan, and wrapped up later that fall, but MGM's financial difficulties led to the film's release being delayed indefinitely.
Well, I guess if that's the only problem facing the movie.
That wasn't the only problem facing the movie, though. The remake would have China invading U.S. soil after the states defaulted on loans, but after excerpts of the script leaked and were met with opposition from Chinese state media, not to mention the revenue MGM would miss out on if the film wasn't released in China, the villains were changed to North Korea. Mind you, this was done in post-production as the movie had already finished filming. Reports state that the changes cost less than $1 million.
I'm sure they did.
But I have my doubts. Released in theaters on November 21st, 2012, the film opened in 7th place with $14 million.
I hope reviews were absolutely fine.
Reviews were absolutely brutal, as critics, and also John Milius himself, bashed the movie, which currently sits at 14% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, the 2012 Red Dawn is more of a cautionary tale than anything, showing what happens when you only think through 30% of a movie before you start filming it.
Yeah, this is in the franchise era, right?
Yeah.
When studios suddenly took a look at themselves and said, what's in our back catalog? We got to start rebooting IP. And that's exactly what MGM did with this. And it was a disaster. It was a big fuck up because they didn't think it through.
This was a poorly thought out production and poorly made, to be honest. It's not very good, is it?
It's a cheesy film, but I went back and looked a little bit at the original Red Dawn. It's cheesy too. Like, these are both teen-oriented action movies with kind of serious themes, but they're about a group of high school kids. And so maybe we shouldn't expect out of either movie something like a real serious political military thriller.
Well, now you just finished reading a book about the relationship between China and Hollywood. And there was a lot about Red Dawn included there, right?
It's a really good book. It's called Red Carpet by a journalist and author named Eric Schwartzel, who really did his research. Like, this book goes deep and talks about the whole history of the Chinese film market and how America got their films into it, how China started bringing their influence back. It's a big story. And when you follow that history, you see its impact on quite a bit of recent films and a lot of films that we've talked about, and certainly the recent eras of filmmaking that we've talked about. So they were at a stage here where Schwartzel says that Avatar's success was the thing that kind of opened the eyes of all of Hollywood. There's a lot of money to be made in China, and there's a lot of money to be lost if you offend them and don't get your movie released there. And it's a real thing. Like, China is an authoritarian regime. You don't get to just put your movie out because you want to. You get to put your movie out there because the government says it's okay. And so you have to tiptoe around everything that they're concerned about. And they're petty and they're vindictive. So it's not just like when MGM's looking at this, it's, oh, should we release a movie? Well, might offend China. That's okay. This movie can make money in the US. That's not the problem. The problem is you will not get your next movie released in China, or your next one, or your next one.
Right.
You will be put on a shit list and you will stay on that list for a long time.
So even though this movie ended up not getting released in China anyway, which is kind of the funny footnote about all these changes they made, it may have been done to save the next movie, is what you're positing.
Yeah, I think MGM had to do the release of it really carefully to try to save their future efforts. And then in this book, it mentions when the movie finally did come out, even though it wasn't in China, Chinese media reported on the changes that MGM had to make to please China. And it was kind of bragging, like, we forced them to change this movie and we didn't have to lift a finger. And it's this sort of chilling conclusion that he draws is, at this point, this is when Hollywood truly learned to self-censor. They started to get it. They started to all look ahead and take things out of the movies without the Chinese censors even having to tell them this has to come out. They started doing it themselves.
And there's lots of movies movies that you hear about being released in China with one scene edited out or one scene changed. They film 2 versions of certain sequences now, one for China, one for the rest of the world. I think The Rise of Skywalker was a big one for that. I think Lightyear was another one that had some scenes specifically removed for the Chinese audience that dealt with same-sex marriage, perhaps. It almost feels like COVID has forced us out of this kind of spiral we were in where we were just getting more and more entrenched in making sure every movie had like a Chinese star in it just to raise your profile a little bit there. You know, like it felt like that was the way it was going, where they were just shoehorning in famous Chinese actors into blockbusters to try to like sell tickets in China.
Yeah, there's this whole phenomenon, as this book tells it, over the course of the last decade or two. It started out with this Chinese market opened up a little bit. They took more movies. They built more theaters. They allowed the U.S. filmmakers to make more money in China because it really is just a spigot that they control. But then their middle class built up. Going to the movies became a more popular thing, and going to American movies became a bigger deal that you could do. So there was all this money flowing. And then it was like, yeah, first like a little scene was enough, or a cameo from a Chinese star. And then they're like, no, that's bullshit. We need more. And then it got to a point where they're like, actually, never mind. We don't need American movies. We're going to take that stuff back off the shelf. We figured out how to please our own audiences with big money-making blockbusters. And so, yeah, we're at this tail end, or at least at the tail end of a wave where it's like American movies are not catering so much because, first of all, the catering didn't work. And then the Chinese market said, and by the way, we kind of don't need you so much. So I think that's better. That's healthier, it seems like. But it's interesting. And this movie happened at the first part of that wave where it just got spanked for being out of sync.
Yeah, it's a very strange movie to watch with all these ideas floating around.
Yeah.
You know, you might not think twice of it, but like a Chinese invasion of America is much more plausible than a North Korean invasion of America.
Yeah.
Knowing what we know about their military capabilities. And I know the movie makes attempts to explain that away by saying they've partnered up with Russia, but even still, like recent history has showed us that Russia's not the most adept at a land war either.
No, I mean, they were in for a rude shock when they tried it, even on their closest neighbor. None of it seems that realistic, but like the original Red Dawn, I think you mentioned, was about a group of nations, right? Because they had Nicaraguan soldiers and
Cuba, Poland, right? Wasn't Poland part of it?
Yeah. So like that happens in this movie too. And it's much more plausible, but it's only near the end that you find out it's more than just North Korea decided to take over the whole country. It's like actually the Eastern Seaboard is occupied by Russia right now is what they find out. And North Korea is just a partial player in this alliance that attacked us, which is more plausible. But the movie doesn't care that much about plausibility, or it would have spent more time working on that earlier on.
It does not give you a good overview of how this invasion went down and like how successful it was. And that's one of the things I miss from it. We'll talk about it. We should get into the story soon anyway, but the early parts of this where you're disoriented are the best parts, but then the movie never tries to orient you. And then you're just like, oh, that wasn't just like good filmmaking making me feel confused. The movie actually has no idea what it's doing either.
It's kind of content to keep the kid's point of view, right? Like it never really tries to be that savvy Tom Clancy thriller with a lot of technical detail and stuff. It gives you one dump at the beginning and then just, kids, go do your thing, shoot guns at the guys in uniform. That's all you need to know.
And that's fine too, but this movie begs the question, like it asks a lot of larger geopolitical questions that it does not have the means or the desire to answer at all.
It's kind of ironic to wade into that territory and then to not really confront it.
Just cop out, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, you want to walk us through the first part of the story?
All right, here we go. U.S. Marine Jed Eckert, played by Chris Hemsworth, has just returned to his hometown of Spokane, Washington, after serving in the Iraq War. Jed watches a football game starring his little brother, Matty, a high school quarterback played by Josh Peck, who loses the game due to his selfish play, which hurts the team. That night, the power goes out mysteriously in the entire town. The next morning, thousands of North Korean paratroopers land and take over Spokane. Jed and Matty, and a few others, escape out of town in Jed's pickup truck, but they have to leave behind their dad, Police Sergeant Tom Eckert, played by Brett Cullen, who is captured by the soldiers. Holed up with a mix of friends and strangers at a cabin outside of town, Jed tries to take charge, but not everyone is sure if they should resist the invaders or if they should surrender. The next morning, the soldiers appear at the cabin, led by a regional commander named Captain Cho. The kids are hiding in the woods, so Cho forces the captive Sergeant Eckert to talk to them over a bullhorn. But rather than encourage them to surrender, Eckert tells the kids to fight like hell. Cho shoots Eckert dead as his two sons and the others look on in horror. And later, Jed gives a speech to his fellow fugitives, inspiring them to stand up and fight for their hometown and their families.
I think we're in agreement this is the most effective section of the movie, right?
or the most intriguing or like promising. The rest is payoff, and it's done almost in montage the rest of the whole movie. So there's not much to grab onto. It's just watching some scenes happen.
Yeah, it's a strangely paced movie. It's just a series of escalating like raids on various military installations, but they don't do a good job of explaining to you like why this one's important more so than the last one. There's no escalation.
It's just scenes.
It feels like just watching somebody play a video game on the easy setting. Like, all right, we got to go do a mission. All right, we shot some guys. We blew up some stuff. We're done with that mission now. Back to the headquarters. Now we got to go back on another mission.
There's a lot missing. Like the movie wasn't that long. What was the runtime?
Hour and 33. Yeah,
okay.
Pretty short.
So I appreciate that. I'm not saying I wanted more of this movie, but maybe some of the things would have felt weightier or more consequential if there had been a little bit more around those scenes.
Yeah, it needed 10 more minutes, which I'm loath to request longer movies too. But this movie was just a little light in the ass for what it was trying to do.
But like you said, yeah, the first act, they actually do spend some time. Like you see Chris Hemsworth just watching a football game and several plays happen. And we're learning about what's the problem with Maddie. He's selfish and cocky and he doesn't listen to the coach.
Terrible actor.
Yeah, we'll get to him. Do you think we can wait? Like, just so everyone knows, we have our notes on Josh Peck as Maddie in the second act. We may not be able to hold back because we both have thoughts about the man.
Let's try, but yeah, we'll see if we can pull it off. But yeah, the intro to this movie does a good job of setting up the global situation that could lead to these circumstances. But it's literally just a voiceover and like a montage.
I was okay with that. Maybe I was an easy win over in that part. I guess it felt a little bit contemporary because Joe Biden's face appears a couple times in the montage because he was VP for a lot of the actual footage they were showing. And I think he did a lot of foreign policy stuff as VP. So it makes sense why he's interacting in these things. But it was enough. I'm like, okay, I get it. It couldn't connect all the dots, but it wasn't written that way. It was written to tell you about some escalating global situations. I'm like, oh, those sound kind of real and bad. Okay, shit's about to go bad. I'm fine.
They sound kind of like what's happening in the world now.
That's true, yeah, which is scary enough. So that kind of works. And like the build-up stuff, the blackout, as we said, there's a blackout the night before. And you're like, oh shit. It gives you that kind of disaster movie thing. And I think I mentioned this in something else we saw. Maybe it was a Godzilla.
Battleship?
Or Battleship, maybe. Yeah, it's like I'm a sucker for those build-ups. I think you're right about Battleship. It's like action disaster movies. I get excited when I know shit's about to go bad. And this movie has a little section of that. That's maybe the most fun part. And then after that, it's not as fun.
Totally. No, I agree 100%. That's my favorite part of those type of movies is where things start going wrong in ways that don't seem major to the characters, but we know better because, you know, we know the synopsis of the movie. And yeah, like when that blackout happens, that's kind of a tension builder. And you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
It does suck you into the small town feeling of Spokane that our characters are living in. You almost forget what you know is coming for a little while. And that's good filmmaking. But then once what you know is coming happens, it's just kind of monotonous.
It's interesting. It happens pretty fast. The next scene, which is fun, is they wake up to the sound of distant rumbling of bombs and they look outside and they see the skies full of paratroopers. And that's really fun and exciting. And then after that, the invasion happens real fast, but it's minimal. There's just armored vehicles on street corners and there's a lot of driving around real fast and crashing through those vehicles and stuff. But it almost feels like they're saving money. There's one shot of paratroopers and they're like, that's all the CGI we got.
There's never more than like 10 North Korean soldiers on screen at any one moment.
That's true. That's a good point.
And that it does make the invasion like, and also there's like a lot of situations where you'd be like, why aren't they just shooting this guy? Chris Hemsworth is driving his pickup truck into people and into cars. And you're like, everyone's just kind of standing around. Like all the North Korean soldiers are just standing around looking confused. They're the ones who are prepared for this. They expected this. They should be a little more battle ready than the civilians they ambushed.
It's true, but it does make you ask questions about, okay, what are the rules of engagement? How do you conduct a war on a population? You know, they're an occupying force, right? They're not there to kill everyone in the city. They just want to take it over. So I kind of liked the restraint that the North Korean soldiers had in large part because they seemed like what an occupying army would try to do, which is only use force when necessary versus, so I went back and I watched the first 10 minutes of the 84 Red Dawn and these fucking Russians land outside the window of a high school and the history teacher walks out and goes, what's going on here, gentlemen? And the history teacher is Frank McRae, by the way, in an awesome little role who we love from Last Action Hero, right? He was the crazy screaming police captain in that. And they fucking gun him down and then they turn their machine guns on the windows full of students gawking out at them. And then they shoot an RPG down the hallway. Like there's no restraint for these Russians in the original.
Jeez. I got to rewatch the 84 Red Dawn. It sounds rad.
It's kind of rad. So times have changed. These North Koreans are like, they let Jed go on this fucking automotive rampage through town trying to get out. And all they do is head him off and cause a little crash, but they never shoot much at him at all.
I take your point about they're an occupying force. They're not there to wipe out the population. And I think it was cool how they drove that point home with the little propaganda posters and the loudspeakers saying, oh, we'll help you rebuild your reputation with the world and we'll get corruption out of your politics.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a smarter angle to take than I would have expected from this movie.
Yes, I think you're exactly right. And we were just saying there's none of that nuance in the movie. And there almost isn't. It's there on the posters. No one ever mentions it. No character ever interacts with that aspect of the North Korean occupation. But it is cool.
I mean, we do see some defectors like Pete, but he seems to just be defecting out of like self-interest.
Fucking Pete, man.
Yeah, he's the fucking worst.
Because he's just a dick.
Almost shoots Chris Hemsworth in his beautiful golden head.
You right away know that this kid is off. He ain't right.
Nobody shoots at Chris, no matter how bad his American accent might be in this movie.
I know you've found plenty of places where it wavered, but I was like, for that guy at that age, I actually was like, that's good enough for me. It's Chris Hemsworth. It's close enough. I'm down with it.
This might have been like the second movie he ever filmed because it was filmed in 2009 and not released till much later.
Okay.
I think he was already Captain Kirk when he made this movie, but that might have been the only like role he had before. I think he did Australian like television stuff, but this might have been the first movie role he like starred.
Was he Captain Kirk's dad in that first Star Trek film? Is that what he was? Okay.
For one scene in the beginning.
Yeah, it was like a flashback scene. And then sometime around this, he was in Cabin in the Woods, which we covered.
Oh, you know what? Cabin in the Woods was also released in 2012, I want to say, but it was filmed earlier too and held on to. So I don't know what came first.
Yeah, I remember there was a story. Maybe we dug that up when we were talking about that movie, is that he was hired on one of these movies and people at the studios were like seeing the dailies and going, oh, this kid's a star. Let's cast him in more stuff. And clearly he exploded the rest of this year, 2012 even. He started popping up in everything, including Thor. And then he was a Hollywood star. But it's interesting to see him in this phase.
Good call, because Cabin in the Woods filmed in March of 2009 and this filmed in September of 2009.
Whoa.
So he literally left one project and went to the other.
And we think of him as this like hitmaker star, but yet this is the third time he's been in the Blast Zone. Cabin, El Royale, and now this.
And it won't be the last. We still got Black Hat on the docket. He's got some bombs under his belt. Let's not sugarcoat it, but that doesn't mean we don't love him.
No, I mean, to be fair, out of the 3 times we've covered him, this is the first time we haven't really liked the movie. Like we thought those other 2 movies were awesome and didn't deserve to bomb. And this one we're like, nah, I get it.
Yeah, and even this one is not quite as bad as I expected based on the reviews.
No, we said we weren't going to talk about it, but if you take one element out of this movie, I won't say what it is.
Oh shit, he was in the Heart of the Sea as well, so it's another one. We're gonna have 5 Hemsworth movies coming up.
Who knew? Yeah. Hemsworth is Hollywood poison.
But that's another one that I like. I like In the Heart of the Sea.
I know. It's
a good movie.
His reputation is upside down. He's a fucking walking disaster.
Oh man, we might have just uncovered a deep truth that I don't want to make my peace with.
It's hard to face.
Yeah. Let's talk about the cabin. So they get to the cabin, and this is where I feel like the movie really slows down and becomes laborious.
It starts to be about the teen drama, and I didn't like these teens. Like even Hemsworth struggles to stay likable here, but nobody else is likable. And it's he
just shoves everybody and throws them to the ground whenever there's a disagreement, which I find like almost refreshing because he has no interest in talking stuff out.
There's no explaining. There's no like I'm the Marine where he like sort of shows them some skill that a hero has that they go, oh, whoa, I get it. No, you're the boss, buddy. It's not like that. It's just, I disagree. And he shoves you to the ground.
That's literally how the scene with Pete, like Pete goes, who put you in charge? And Chris Hemsworth's like, oh, well, let me tell you. And he walks up to him and then just like grabs the gun and like smushes his face into the ground. He's like, fuck you.
Exactly. It's pretty dicky. And I'm not sure whether that's a turnoff or I have to give the movie credit because I'm like, this is probably how it would go with teenagers. They're not like exactly explaining things to each other. They're just acting on their emotions. And so is it more real that way and we're not being fair to it?
Also, the character of Jed has been in the Marines for 6 years. So he's at least like 10 years older than some of these characters.
True.
That he's just bullying. He's in his like mid-20s probably. And everyone else is still in high school, various grades, but still like Maddie is at most a high school senior. He's still clearly in high school.
Yeah, there's something there of like what happens when society breaks down and it's a bunch of 16, 17-year-olds and one 24-year-old Marine is actually, I don't know, that could be something very interesting to figure out like, oh, you're the adult in the room now. And it's there in the text, but it's like you said, it's not really explored except for him just being a bully and a dick.
Yellow Jackets actually did a fun play on that to some extent because there is one adult that like crashes with them, like a teacher, but he's injured in the crash. So like his authority gradually wanes as they realize no one's coming to get them.
Yeah.
And he tries to maintain some level of authority. They're like, what are you going to do?
Yeah. There was an opportunity for more here. I wanted more like Marine stuff. The guy doesn't even admit he's a Marine. He doesn't say it.
He says it in the bar in the beginning. beginning, but yeah, he never brings it up again, really.
Yeah, you would think he would whip out the big lessons that he learned, and they're kind of thin. Maybe that's a critique that we would aim at the writers. Like, he should have spent more time figuring out what a Marine who had just come back from Iraq would say and do, because it's kind of a blank slate. He doesn't really feel very specific as a character.
It's also not a character that plays to Hemsworth's strengths, which we now understand better than filmmakers did back then. But he's not this stoic action hero. He's actually like a very personable and funny actor. There's almost no levity in this movie at all, though.
No, this movie, as we said, it's an attempt to reboot an IP, and they made a lot of choices where they stuck close to the original. The characters have the same names. So, Jed Eckert is the Patrick Swayze character. And Swayze is kind of that. Like, he makes a good big brother in the original, but we also know that he was a guy he had a tough guy side and a funny sense of humor side. I'm not sure how much of it comes out at that point in 84, but it's interesting if you imagine the studio like, we've got to cast a Swayze. How are we going to find our Swayze? They did pretty good in finding Hemsworth, even if they didn't use him that well.
That's fair. Yeah, he is like the modern day Swayze, I guess you could say.
I'm not sure that was a good idea to go that far, but
I don't know. He hasn't really done a romantic movie yet, though. Like, he hasn't have a Dirty Dancing or a Ghost under his belt.
Exactly. He didn't go that direction, so we can't quite give him.
I think Gosling is the modern day Swayze then.
Interesting.
He's done the tough guy roles. He's done the romance. He's done some comedy.
And Channing Tatum filled a part of the Swayze.
He went too comedic, though. Yeah.
he went too comedy, but in being a guy who could dance and play the sex symbol, he filled a slice of the Swayze legacy. It's big shoes to fill.
They are big shoes to fill, but I'm sticking with my pick. I think Gosling is the modern day Swayze.
I like it.
Feels right to me. He's done it all.
That's true. He did the song and dance. He did the comedy. He did some darker drama.
Some really dark drama. Talking about Nicholas Winding Refn last week. Only God Forgives is one of the most laborious watches I've ever done.
I've avoided it because I'm scared of how dark that one is.
It gets pretty fucked up. All right, so let's talk about Brett Cullen.
Yeah.
Brett Cullen, of course, plays Lieutenant Tom Eckert, who is the local police officer and father to Jed and Maddie. Also had a sizable role in one episode of Justified, and that's our Justified crossover of the week.
Justified crossover of the week.
Oh, shit.
He was a horse trainer.
I tried to act surprised for a minute there, but honestly, when I saw Cullen on the screen, I'm like, this dude was definitely in Justified. Yeah. I didn't even have to look it up. I could see it in his face.
He's got the face of a guy that was definitely in Justified, but actually, he is not the only Justified crossover of the week.
Oh,
Justified crossover of the week.
Ron Yoon.
Okay.
Who I think was also in Battleship, but he's a guy, you'd know him if you saw him. He was in one episode of Justified early on in season 5. He played Simon Lee in one episode of Justified, and in Red Dawn, he is an uncredited clerk.
Okay, so that was small. I probably didn't notice him in this.
Probably not, but he's got some big credits since then. He's doing stuff, and his characters have names now.
Good for him.
Yeah, he's a really interesting actor to watch. He's got a bunch of stuff coming up. So it's 2 Justified crossovers of the week, but Brett Cullen, that's who you cast for this role.
That was solid, yeah.
Semi-small town cop who's stoic, probably instilled good values in his kids, except Maddie, the worst.
Yeah, Maddie's kind of a failure. You got to look to Tom there, but shit went down in the Eckert household. They lost the mom. Jed enlisted, and I guess things were pretty topsy-turvy through Maddie's formative years.
Yeah, he would have been like 10, 11 when all that went down, so that could fuck you up for sure.
Yeah.
But his speech isn't so much rousing as just kind of like, you're probably going to die, but you better go fight these people. And then he gets shot in the head unceremoniously.
I think both of us said we gave the movie props for going there, like killing the dad off in front of us in that brutal way. But I was thinking he was going to get out of it. He gets up and says, what does he say?
Just go to war, kill these pieces of shit.
There you go. Thank you.
Along those lines.
But yeah, they telegraph it as he's like taking the mic. They cue up the Adagio for strings, platoon death sequence, stirring string music. And I'm like, oh, this guy's already dead. I thought he was going to say something different. I thought he was going to sneak out of it by telling them, okay, boys, time to come home. And then like give them some code word that really meant fight and don't come home.
Right.
But like, no, it was like he gave us a sort of half-assed speech.
No coded message or anything. He's just really going for it.
Yeah. Did he really have to die for that? That's a bold move to be like, you know what? This is my chance. I'm going to fucking commit suicide in front of my kids in hopes that it turns the tide of this war. Bold move.
I feel like even if you didn't work out a code ahead of time, if maybe like you didn't point at Captain Cho and call him a piece of shit, like he might have just like brought you back to a prison camp or something. You could have just softened your language a little bit and you might not have got shot in the head.
But that wouldn't have been enough to inspire his kids. This guy is willing to go the extra mile to really drive home the lesson.
Get the Wolverines riled up, which is weird because the movie's filmed in Michigan, but takes place in Washington, but the team is still called the Wolverines.
That has confused better people than us. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very confusing set of geographical references.
Do you have anything else from this section you wanted to go over, or should we move on to the middle?
I think let's see what happens next.
All right. The newly formed band of insurgents named themselves the Wolverines after their high school football team. They set up camp in an abandoned mine, acquire weapons, and train to be soldiers under Jed's guidance. Then the Wolverines begin to mount guerrilla attacks on North Korean soldiers in the city, growing bigger and bolder as time goes on. In their most ambitious plan yet, the Wolverines prepare to blow up the local North Korean leadership at a public event. But during the mission, Maddie spots his girlfriend Erica being put on a bus with other prisoners. Maddie breaks off on his own to try to rescue Erica, which spoils the mission and causes one Wolverine to be killed while trying to help him. Maddie eventually returns to camp with Erica, but Jed chews him out for his selfish ways, which hurt the team. Maddie runs off alone. I pictured Maddie running off with his arms like waving wildly above her head.
I wish they would have shown that scene and they cut that shot out of the edit, because actually, and we talked about this, Maddie runs off, but I didn't know that until I rewatched the film, paused it, went back and forth a bunch of times to try to figure out what happened. He literally walks out of frame. He sulks out of frame after this conversation with his brother, but nowhere do they show him leaving the camp. There is no shot of him putting on a backpack and cresting a hill and looking over his shoulder one last time. There's nothing, because they just quickly cut to another meaningless guerrilla fight in the town. And then they cut back and the girl has to go, Maddie has been gone for 3 days, because none of us would have any idea that he was actually gone unless she said that.
Yeah, victim of editing there. It's not a very well thought out sequence. It really does not make it clear what's going on.
But that's maybe our smallest gripe with Josh Peck as Maddie.
Man, I guess it's time, because Maddie's kind of the star of this section of the movie, and maybe that's why it sucks so bad. I want to be clear that I hate the character of Maddie, but I also hate the performance from Josh Peck.
Thank you.
They're both fucking terrible.
Thank you for being an articulate and respectful hater of both. Because Peck, yes, I don't like this guy. I usually go out of my way to be understanding of actors and go, look, this role, this was a mismatch, or the script was really tough. The director was not that good. The actors were doing their best. This is an actor that I do not want to see his face on screen ever again. I hated nearly every second that his face was on screen.
This is probably the meanest Ian's ever been on a Blast Zone episode, I think.
I'm sorry, and I already regret it, because it's not me. Anyone who listens to us will hopefully see that's the truth. But this guy, his face, right? Why is he making those faces?
He's got some really weird faces going on. First of all, his mouth is never closed. No. He's just always standing with his mouth open a little bit, which doesn't instill the biggest impression of intelligence. The term mouth breather exists for a reason.
Yes. Slack-jawed yokel is another term that ties into that.
But somehow that's better than when something tragic happens and he just smiles weirdly, which also happens a few times.
I thought it was oh, did I see that wrong? But no, these terrible things keep happening because he's a fuck up. That's the story, is that he has an arc. He's selfish and he has to learn, and all these bad things have to happen. Every time he has a confrontation, he's jutting out his jaw and he's pursing his lips a little bit, but it turns into a smile. And they're telling him, the guy who tried to help you when you went off on your own, he died. And he's grinning into the camera. And then he confronts that guy's girlfriend, who's you got my boyfriend killed. And he's smiling again. And what the fuck is wrong with this kid?
And then she throws up a peace sign at him. It's completely unearned.
That was really dopey. That was oh God, they're trying to distract from Josh Peck by making her do stupid shit now. Yeah, he doesn't say a word. He doesn't apologize. She just looks at him.
He just stares at him.
It's oh shit, here's the big showdown between the guy who got her boyfriend killed. What are they going to say to each other? And she just goes, deuces. What the fuck?
It's a very unfortunate performance from Josh Peck. And I'll be honest, I don't know him from other things. I know he's famous for Drake and Josh, which I was too old to have watched. And he's currently on the How I Met Your Father show.
Okay.
He's one of the stars of that. But this movie has soured me on the idea of ever intentionally watching him in anything ever again. It's that bad a performance.
Yeah, so he did work again. I had no idea who he was. I was watching this movie the first time. I wrote down in my notes a bold prediction. This man never worked as an actor again after this movie. Because if I ran Hollywood, unfortunately that would be the case. I would not have hired him again. But he did some work, but actually it seems like he's transitioned into more being a YouTuber and an Instagram influencer. And so that kind of makes perfect sense to me.
Okay. Even his IMDb photo is alarmingly close to his face, and he's got the dopey smile on. It's
I can't look. I don't want to see any more of his face.
Yeah. We don't know him personally. He might be a lovely guy.
He might be awesome.
We're not trying to say he's a bad person, but he is a bad actor.
Yeah, I think he might be just acting too hard. I think that's it. Every scene where he's got to react to some bad news, you could see his jaw clenching and his neck tendons flexing. And it's dude, just, I don't know, be a person.
Yeah, dial it down. He's playing to the rafters, so to speak.
Anyway, he didn't go on to do too much, but Josh Hutcherson did. This is a guy who had a career as an actor in at least in young adult stuff.
Yeah, most famous as PETA in the Hunger Games movies, the baker's boy who's super strong because he has to carry bags of flour because that's YA explanations are they don't have to be the most nuanced. But I also dislike his character in this movie, but to your point, you think he's playing like kind of an idiot on purpose.
That's kind of the part, right? Like the Maddie character is supposed to be cocky, but actually really talented. So it's a matter of him not living up to his potential as a leader. This Robert role that Josh Hutcherson in is like the dopey scared kid, right? He has this arc where he's too scared to pull the trigger at first, and he's learning to overcome his fears. He wears a goofy hat. And so
Davy Crockett type hat.
And so despite the fact that character was also annoying, there were moments where I saw him have to actually act for a second or say a straight line. And I'm like, okay, this man can act, and I don't mind him when he's acting. So I actually came away with a better impression of Josh Hutcherson than I went in with.
Yeah, he's not bad in this. His character sucks, but he's supposed to, like we said. And what's he been up to? I think I have some notes. He's done a lot of voice work too.
Okay.
He was in Howl's Moving Castle.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, so he's got 5 movies that are in some form of production or post-production. So he's busy as fuck. He's going to be the star of the upcoming Five Nights at Freddy's movie, which has the potential to be a big franchise for him. He's playing Mike Schmidt. My son loves the Five Nights at Freddy's games. So I'm sure at some point I'll have to watch that.
Are those scary?
They're like the YA version of scary. My son's way too young to play them, so I don't let him play them. But like,
he studies them from afar?
Yeah.
As kids do?
He's more of a scholar.
Yes. And I get that.
But yeah, they're scary, but I think they're rated like PG. There's no blood. It's just like creepy animatronics being creepy.
Oh, gotcha.
But the things that scare him are so minor, and then he watches this shit, and I'm like, I can't reconcile this.
I don't know. It's like a feeling of what you're in control of and what you're not. I still have that. I still treat scary stuff with an absolute like childlike mentality that if something is trying to get me, I'm incredibly terrified of it. But if I'm going towards it, I can be okay with it.
There are scenes in Moana that he won't watch because he's like, this is too scary. But then put on the Five Nights at Freddy's and he's right there. But anyway, yeah. So Hutcherson, his career it's ebbed and flowed for sure. I think post Hunger Games, he wasn't really in anything huge, but it seems like he's got some big movies coming out at some point.
It's interesting because he's older now. I'm like, wait a minute, he's doing a thing that's kind of YA again, or
he's only 30.
Okay,
that's pretty young for a guy who's been around as long as he has. I mean, I remember him in the Will Ferrell soccer movie, Kicking and Screaming, as like a little kid.
Oh, okay, I didn't see that.
That was pretty funny. It's much more family oriented than most of the Will Ferrell doing sports movies from that era, but it's got some laughs.
I guess we're friendly to Josh Hutcherson here. Pete, the collaborator, not so much.
Oof, not so much. Fuck that guy. Just the worst. What a dick. He immediately becomes not just a collaborator, but he's wearing like the uniform and everything.
Yes, he turns on him right away. So we did say he did get pushed in the mud by Jed, but he's like, fuck you. He stole all their Girl Scout cookies or whatever food they found at the house, took off in the middle of the night with that, managed to get into town and report to Captain Cho, hey, the kids you're looking for are out at this cabin. Because by the next morning, he's back there. He's riding in the cars with Captain Cho. He's there for the murder of Tom Ecker. And then that wasn't enough for him. He joins the full-on Black Shirts Corps, where he's wearing these stark-looking black uniforms with red armbands of the like collaborator Stasi or whatever. It's pretty grim. And he gets his comeuppance pretty fast because everything moves pretty fast in this act. In another sort of montage scene, he gets blown to smithereens, and it's kind of fun.
Well, Maddie's giving him the dual middle fingers.
Yes, that was silly. That was ridiculous.
Very silly.
Like, hey, Pete, look at my finger. And he's like, what? The Wolverines? And then he blows up. It's silly.
That's almost verbatim, I think, how it actually goes down.
Is that what you're supposed to say when you flip somebody off? Look what my finger's doing at you.
Check out my finger. And that's on one of their many sojourns into the city to do crime. That's just how this section of the movie goes. They're like, all right, we got to go blow up some shit. They go into the city, they blow up some shit, shoot some people, then they leave, and then do it all again. It really is a montage of just terrorist acts.
Yeah.
Justified though they may be.
Yeah. It's like a regular commute for them. They live out in the woods in an abandoned mine, but they're fucking in the city all the time. And then they have the nerve to complain. There's one scene where it's a little wrap up where everyone's regrouping after seeing this montage of missions. And they're all like complaining, we haven't seen real food for months. Or what about a flushing toilet? I'm like, you guys, we see you. Like the last montage had you slipping in and out of buildings all damn day. And there were plenty of people helping you out. There's like a lady putting a jacket over a guy's shoulders. They're giving them guns. They're giving them food. Like, why don't they just stay in town?
They robbed a Subway at some point.
They robbed a Subway. And that was like
at gunpoint, which there's no North Korean people in that subway. They're just robbing their neighbors.
Yes. They took all the bread and turkey out of a subway. We're talking about a sandwich shop, not a public transit. Right. And yeah, that's when these guys were like, oh my God, that was my first taste of bread with Italian seasonings on it in months. And it's like, you could have stopped at Subway every day when you were in the city. What are you doing with your time?
Before you do your crime, they're not looking for you. So you could just go get a sandwich.
They say it out loud. Like, they can't track us in the city. There's 500,000 people. Yeah, go buy McDonald's.
And there's 14 North Korean troops.
That's true.
Patrolling.
There's 2 guys on 5 different street corners in downtown.
It does not seem like they have enough of a presence to occupy even a mid-sized city like Spokane. All right, did you want to walk us through the end of the movie?
Okay, let's try to bring this thing home. Jed and Maddie reconcile their differences, and the Wolverines are reunited at their base when the North Koreans suddenly carpet bomb the area. 2 of the Wolverines are killed, and the others are forced to flee deeper into the woods. There, they run across a trio of U.S. Marine insurgents led by Sergeant Major Andrew Tanner, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Tanner tells them he's after the communications briefcase carried by Captain Cho, which is the key to the North Koreans' technical advantage in the war. Together, they all mount a mission to infiltrate the North Korean stronghold at Spokane Police headquarters and steal the briefcase. During the attack, Jed has a one-on-one showdown with Captain Cho, and he avenges his father by killing Cho with his dad's gun. The heroes successfully steal the briefcase, but as they regroup and celebrate their victory, they're ambushed, and Jed is killed. Later, as the Marines get ready to fly out with the briefcase, they offer to take the remaining Wolverines with them, but they decline. Maddie decides to stay behind, and echoing the inspirational words of his departed brother, he becomes a leader of the resistance, recruiting many more people to the cause and beginning to turn the tide to liberate America. Maddie has truly become a team player.
That is the message of the movie.
As much as you thought it was a war movie, it's about this kid growing up.
This kid that I could not care less about if I fucking tried.
Yeah.
So, of all the silly, nonsensical things that happen in this movie, just the vast Washington wilderness coming across the 3 Marines that have crash landed in the forest by luck seems quite convenient.
Yeah, you find out that they're looking for them, but why are they looking there? Because we know that the Wolverines are on the run. They were flushed out of their headquarters, so everybody's lost in the forest, and they're just like, hey, who are you? What are you doing? I'm a U.S. Marine. Don't fuck with me. I didn't catch the name of Tanner's sidekick guy, but he's the comic Marine.
He's the more brusque one. More. Every troop needs one.
But Jeffrey Dean Morgan is good, and he's like a positive thing in this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like the perfect role for him. Gruff father figure Marine type dude.
Yeah.
Sure. Like, I buy it. Why not?
He gets some cheesy lines he has to pull off because they sit down with them once they figure out who each other are. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're actually looking for the Wolverines to help us get this box. And he has this cheesy line about telling the Wolverines, you've made a difference. Hell, you are the difference. It's okay. Is this the place for this cheesy back patting?
Take it down a notch. No one's accomplished anything yet.
But he's fun, and it gives them some more firepower so they can launch this mission. The mission, it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's not that believable, but it's kind of fun. I liked how it was like a video game mission. They get into the headquarters and they're like, here's 3 wires. One of them leads to the object you're looking for. And they each go to a different floor of the headquarters, and they send people out to try to find the briefcase.
Now that you mention it, that really is like a video game-ass premise for a mission.
Isn't it? In the video game, you'd have to follow each of the 3 wires. This time they split up and they let everybody have their own little adventure.
And, the first wire wouldn't lead to what you needed, but there'd be like a boss fight at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
You'd get like a new cool gun for defeating the guy. Like they'd work it where you do the correct one last, but you'd still get something from the other 2. I could totally see that. I do think that the mission goes on a little long and starts to feel fatiguing. Like I felt myself glazing over at points.
I think some of that's in the edits. We mentioned other problems with the edit. I watched that scene twice and I tried to figure out what happens when the tank crashes through the wall. The North Koreans drive a tank into the police headquarters as things start to get crazy. And there's a guy in the cockpit with a mounted machine gun firing on our heroes. And then it cuts back and Josh Hutcherson's in the cockpit. And as far as I could tell, they never showed what happened. There was just things like that happen where it's real dark. There's a lot of quick cuts and it's just hard to follow.
I don't know. Was the mandate that's had to be a 90-minute movie? Because even with just 5 more minutes, you could have added a lot of context to some of these scenes that would have helped make them feel like they belong.
Yeah. We talked about how Jed beats Cho in the end because he's ended up fighting basically at his late father's desk in the police headquarters. And Jed knows the combination to the keypad safe under his dad's desk. And that's coincidentally accidentally he ends up knocked to the ground in that very spot where he can reach for that. But there's no setup for that. Did I even get that correct? Or
yeah, I think a better written, better paced, better edited movie would have, instead of Jed and Tom meeting up at the football game, have Jed visit him at work at his desk.
Oh, yes.
You know, in the first act, and say something like, let's go to the football game now. And he's, hold on, just got to put my gun back in the safe.
I'm all for lean payoffs that didn't need setup. And it was fun to connect that because he's reaching under this desk. You're like, why is he pushing buttons on a keypad? Cho's coming for him. And then like a door pops open and out pops his dad's ID and badge and a pistol, which was handy to shoot Cho with.
Sure. It's what you want in that situation.
So it worked, but it was like kind of a surprise thing. And like everything, it's just a lot of things come out of nowhere.
It's not a bad resolution to that scene, but it just could have been set up better.
Everything kind of feels like a highlight reel.
Yes.
It's like you're just seeing the highlights from every fight, except in this fight where like you are seeing some of the drawn out parts. But
the longest trailer in the history of movies, 93 minutes. But then Jed's victory is short-lived because kudos to the movie once again for doling out some brutal comeuppance. As soon as their mission is accomplished and it feels like they've got the upper hand, he gets boom, fucking shot right in the head. There's no cuts. It's just he gets up, he starts walking down a hallway, and then bam.
Again with no setup. And I'm like, oh, that's something that would happen like in a darker movie or Bourne spy thriller or something, right? Like people getting assassinated when you haven't even seen the gun that's coming for them. But there's no cut. I watched it the second time. Like, did they cut for a second and show the Russians sneaking up on their base? Like, no, they didn't. The guy walks down the hall towards his new girlfriend and there's just a gunshot and his head explodes. It doesn't really explode, but he falls down dead.
I think it's still a PG-13 movie, so
yes,
it doesn't explode.
It's not too much blood, but yeah, that was brutal. It was good, I guess.
It was well done. It took me a second to be like, oh shit, that really happened. And we know whoever shot him, it wasn't Chekhov because we didn't see that gun beforehand.
There's no Chekhov's gun. There was just Chekhov's bullet going through his head.
And then the movie wraps up not on an overall happy ending, but like the tide is turning like Warcraft. It's just setting up like the real central conflict that will take place in the world going forward. Because they certainly haven't gotten their independence or anything. The resistance is still in its early stages.
But you do see these scenes. Maddie's lecturing a new crop of soldiers, and now there's 15 or 20 of them instead of 6. And then they launch this assault on the POW camp. So it looks like they're about to liberate a much larger force to fight back with.
That's a good note to end on, I think.
It wasn't bad. They did us a favor. After that last scene of Maddie bonding with his brother just before his brother dies, I guess we see him again in the helicopter scene when he turns down the ride home from Jeffrey Dean Morgan. But like when he's doing this next montage of stirring up the troops, they don't show his face, do they? I feel like it was all over his shoulder.
I wonder if it was like reshoots with a stand-in or something.
Oh, that's a good question.
Maybe they weren't happy with the ending they had. But yeah, no, it works.
I was thankful. It's so much better when I don't have to see that guy's face.
I think it also works conceptually of like the leader of a revolution. Like it doesn't really matter what they look like, who they are. It's more about what they represent.
Yeah. It's not about him anymore. He's a team player.
Yeah. I don't know if that's what the movie was going for. I might be giving it too much credit, but I think thematically it makes sense. All right. That was Red Dawn. Maybe my expectations were like super low, but I didn't hate it as much as I thought I would.
I didn't either.
It's pretty competently made overall. It's got a cast that I like for the most part, except for one glaring exception.
It's hard to get around that one big stick in the mud, but I was okay with it. If you're like okay with that guy, you'll be like way more okay with this movie. There's nothing too much wrong with it. It's just youth oriented and the action is fast and loose and not all that serious. So as long as you go in looking for that, it's not bad. And if you're a Hemsworth fan and a completist, you got to check this one out.
Did you want to hear what John Milius thought of this movie?
Absolutely.
He had some choice words for it, which I alluded to in the intro. He said, and I quote, "There was a strange feeling to the whole thing. They were fans of the movie, so they put in stuff they thought was neat. It's all about neat action scenes and has nothing to do with story. There's only one example in 4,000 years of Chinese territorial adventurism, and that was in 1979 when they invaded Vietnam. And to put it mildly, they got their asses handed to them. Why would China want us? They sell us stuff. We're a market. I would have done it about Mexico." Of course, John Milius would have done it about Mexico, but that's neither here nor there.
He kind of sounds like us, though, right?
He's not wrong. I mean, he's raising some valid concerns, some points. If anyone knows, it would be him. Although, I don't think he wrote the original. I think he just directed it.
Oh, I thought he might have co-written it, too.
Oh, Kevin Reynolds, our homie who directed Waterworld, was the main writer, but Milius did a pass on it.
I see.
Look at that. More Blast Zone synergy. Good old Kevin Reynolds wrote Red Dawn. Who fucking knew? I probably said it in the Waterworld episode and just forgot.
Probably, yeah.
So that's what John Milius thought about the movie. I think that's a pretty level-headed analysis.
And he's latched onto a thing that a lot of people did, critics as well, complaining about the realism of the choice of antagonists, whether that's China or North Korea. You make cases why neither one is all that plausible. And it's an interesting question to ask yourself is like, why do people get hung up on that stuff? And I think it's because you want a movie like this to be realistic enough to terrify you. That's the goal of a military thriller, is to be plausible enough to scare you. But like we said, I bought into that part. I was like, okay, it's North Korea, whatever. So it wasn't the politics that lost me. It was the tone and the execution more.
I think you're right. And I think when a movie starts from a place of such implausibility, it does remove stakes and weightiness from the rest of the film. That's kind of how it felt. For something about such a bleak, upsetting subject, the movie feels light in the ass. And that might be why, because they didn't lay the groundwork to make it believable.
But I wonder if that's a chicken and egg thing, because maybe they wanted to play it light and youthful and just about those neat action scenes, as Milius says. And like all they needed was a decent amount of justification. Now, that being said, I have more background on that from my red carpet book. When Ellsworth was hired to write a version of the script, he told the studio, I don't want to do Fakistan invades the US. That's apparently a quote that like he was concerned with the realism of it, right? He doesn't want to make up a country. It's got to be real. They're like all agreed it should be China. And when they were forced to switch, he was mad. He was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But in the end, he realized that he didn't get paid unless
the movie gets released.
He had a lot more money coming to him if he followed it through and the movie got released. So he and Passmore, both the writers, got together and worked on writing that new intro that explained the political background.
I wonder if this movie's better if they stuck to the original plan. I'm curious how it would have played.
I don't know. Like we said, it kind of doesn't matter. The enemy is just 10 guys in a Jeep.
Yeah, it's true.
In downtown Spokane.
It's true. Yeah, this was already filmed, so it's not like they made the scale smaller when they realized it was going to be North Korea.
No.
Like, as far as they knew, that was the entire Chinese occupation.
They're spread out. I mean, but really, how many troops can you commit to Eastern Washington State where there's not a lot of people?
Which is why a land war in North America is pretty absurd in general. An invasion just wouldn't work. There's too many fucking open spaces with nothing here for people to hide out in, and too many guns, frankly.
You could maybe take San Francisco and try to hold it as a fortress.
Take Governor's Island.
Use it as leverage.
All right. So this was the only movie Dan Bradley ever directed. It does not seem like he'll get another shot either. He was like a stunt coordinator extraordinaire before this movie. He's got a list of credits that are phenomenally long for stunt coordinating. Even like movies as recently as the newest Jurassic World.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
He's he's still working.
So he's still making a good living in Hollywood. Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah. And he does a lot of assistant directing or second unit directing.
Okay.
But this was his only directorial effort. And maybe it just soured him on the whole idea. And he's not looking for another chance because he's got his wheelhouse and he seems to be really good at it and keeps getting work in big movies. So why not?
It juxtaposes nicely to Chris Hemsworth movies directed by very successful stunt coordinators.
Yeah.
Sam Hargrave, world's most handsome stunt coordinator.
Seriously.
Has had the opposite experience. He seems to be thriving after making Extraction with Hemsworth.
Extraction 2 coming soon.
Yeah, we keep bringing it up here because I'm excited about it.
I'm excited too. I think it's going to be awesome. Speaking of Hemsworth, he was on a roll here. His first movie appearance was 2009 with Star Trek, and then he was in A Perfect Getaway, which is underrated, and Cash. This was filmed before he was Thor, but released after.
Right.
So he was already known to audiences as Thor by now. And then Cabin in the Woods, The Avengers, and Snow White and the Huntsman all came out in 2012 alongside this. So he was...
What a year he had.
Yeah, he was blowing up in a big way. He's obviously a huge star now. I'm not going to list all his credits, but another episode we could do, Men in Black International. It's another bomb he was in.
I forgot that existed, but yeah, I can picture him now.
Him and Tessa Thompson. That movie did not do well, so we could talk about that if we wanted to. But he's going to be in the upcoming Extraction 2, which is direct to Netflix, so no fear of that bombing at the box office.
Okay.
And Furiosa, which I assume will be a big hit because
you got to think
everyone loved Fury Road so much.
Yeah, that's neat.
That'll be awesome. So Josh Peck, we mentioned, he was best known for Drake and Josh, but he had done a decent number of movies before this. He's working steadily. He's in How I Met Your Father, like I said, but also he's in Oppenheimer. It seems like everyone's in that movie.
That's a weird choice.
Yeah.
What the fuck is Nolan thinking?
He's like 38, but he still looks like he's 22 to me. So I don't know what role he's going to play in Oppenheimer.
I'm curious to see. Obviously, I'm going to see that at some point. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, if not in theaters, at home. But we talked about Josh Hutcherson a decent amount. But Adrianne Palicki, she was a big part of Friday Night Lights, which I'm a big fan of.
Oh, okay.
She was one of the 5 main leads of that show. She played Tyra. She was great in that. But her movie career, she was originally floated to be Wonder Woman before Gal Gadot was hired.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Which I could see. She's certainly tall, strikingly beautiful. She's got that whole thing going for her. But her movie career never really took off like that. She's been in some big movies, but kind of small roles. She was Lady J in G.I. Joe Retaliation. She was Miss Perkins in the first John Wick. But she seems like she's gotten most of her work on TV, doing stuff like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. She was in the main cast. She's been on the Orville for years and years. And that's a show that people really seem to like. I haven't checked it out, but keeps getting canceled and renewed.
Okay.
Keeps switching networks so that it can keep being made. I think it's still on. I can't swear to it, but it was on as recently as 2022.
Okay.
She's getting steady work, and she's good in this, but she doesn't have much to do.
There's one scene that I was like, again, I usually can not blame the actors. There's one scene where like the guy gets the tracker implanted in him and she blames that guy for killing Jed. And I'm like, that didn't make any sense logically in the story. She had to scream at him, you killed Jed, you killed Jed. And I'm like, come on, that doesn't make any sense. But I can't blame her for that. It was fine acting. It was just like a nonsensical
bad writing
moment.
Did you have anything else about Red Dawn that you wanted to get off your chest before I reveal next week's movie?
I had something here. I wrote this final thought about how this is really a teen movie, which we talked about a lot. But if you step back and look at it, it's interesting to think that it's telling you America getting invaded, that's not the hard thing. Fighting a war of insurgency, that's not the hard part. What's actually hard in life is growing up and learning to be a team player. And like, it's kind of silly when you see how much the movie really gets that message across, whether it was intending to or not. And then, by the way, just to rub it in, they're like, when things get really serious, we'll parachute some grown-ups in. Jeffrey Dean Stanton will make sure that everything's okay.
Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Sorry, Harry Dean Stanton was in the original. He was the dad cop. Jeffrey Dean Morgan will parachute in because you kids still need adult supervision. And then it struck me like, okay, so they made this teen movie, but they were trying to capitalize on nostalgia. This is an IP play. This is a reboot of a movie who everyone who was excited about this movie the first time was now at least in their 40s by the time this came out. So why do we need to learn these tough kid lessons? Maybe that shouldn't have been what the movie was about, but who am I to That's
say?
actually a really good point. Why turn this into a YA movie if it's a nostalgia play for boomers or Gen X at least?
Gen X, please. I'm not quite a boomer.
My apologies. But no, I think that's a good summary. And again, we've reviewed worse movies on here. We will certainly do other ones that are worse. Just felt like a bit of a missed opportunity here.
I hope we did it justice. Even the movies that we care the least about, I'm like, I hope I didn't fuck that up.
This is a few movies in a row now, though, that I've been lukewarm on.
Yeah.
Like, I liked it, but I didn't love it.
I know. Are we going to break out of that next week, you think?
I am. I don't know if you are.
Okay.
One of the criticisms we leveled at War Dogs was that it didn't treat arms dealing and gun running with kind of the gravity that it deserves. It was a little cavalier.
Sure.
So I thought it'd be fun to juxtapose that with my favorite movie about gun running, which is the Nicolas Cage 2005 drama Lord of War.
Oh.
Which is a favorite of mine. I think that's 2005, right? Yes. Just like walking up to the line of one of the last great Nicolas Cage performances before he became the guy who just acts in 300 things a year to pay his overdue taxes.
Okay. Yeah, that's promising.
It feels like a movie he took because he liked it. It's got a small but vital Ethan Hawke performance that is just like electric every time he's on screen.
I love that.
It's got a pretty bad Jared Leto performance, I will say.
Okay.
But we don't like Jared Leto, so to watch him flounder in a movie kind of makes me happy.
Yeah.
Like he seems like a bad dude, so I don't really mind.
Is this the movie where Nick Cage is made out of bullets on the poster?
Maybe.
Okay, we're going to investigate that. We'll get back to you next week.
We'll get you an answer. It's got Ian Holm playing the Bradley Cooper, Henry Gerard character.
Neat.
I love Ian Holm. He's so good in that movie. Small role, but commands the screen every time he's on there, even though he's such a little guy.
Does he make the scary Bilbo face?
He doesn't make the scary. No, he's very calm and collected. He never loses his cool. But yeah, I'm excited for you to check it out because it's a movie I've been waving the flag for a long time. So I'm interested to hear what you think about it.
Can't wait.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod. Follow us on Twitter at BlastZonePod. Start trying to tweet more often. Email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com with any feedback, recommendations for movies, criticism.
We don't like that. We like everything else.
Send us nice things. And we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
The Blast Zone.